Hello, this is Teri with myipadlive.com, and this is part 4 of Reserved for Nina. I've been working on this image in 4 parts to make it easier not to have such a long video. On many images, I take up to 2 hours to actually process them, and so instead of doing a long demonstration that would have probably been longer than most people wanted to watch, I broke it into multiple parts. So I'm going to move forward with this image. So far I have taken the original, brought it into Word Photo, brought it into Image Blender, Filterstorm, Snapseed, FX Photo Studio, and Dynamic Light. And again, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do it in multiple parts, because the list did get quite extensive. So now I'm going to take the Dynamic Light version and I'm going to bring them back into Filterstorm. So I'm going to open up Filterstorm. I'm going to load the photo, and again I've created a folder just for those images for ease of finding them, for one thing, and also for demonstrating that it is nice to have different folders for your images so you can actually see your process. So I know that this fourth from the last image is where I left off, and so I'm going to bring that one in. Again, this is an image that was last processed with Dynamic Light. So what I want to do here, the reason that I'm not satisfied with this image at this point, is it looks really flat to me, and I've lost some detail also in the plaque Reserved for Nina, Monday through Friday. So I'm going to bring those details first back into the plaque, and then I'm going to bring some more details into some other areas to give it more contrast and also give it some more depth. So in order to do that, I have to use a past image where actually the plaque was a little more clear. But I don't want to go back too far, because then I'll change the color. So I'm going to go to Add Exposure. I'm going to go to my folder, and now I know that the image prior to the bump mapped image, which again, if you watch the prior tutorials, you'll see what I'm talking about, was the one that has without the texture of the bump mapping. Now again, in part 2 I went through the Filterstorm also in a lot of the same ways. And I'm going to fit to image, and then I'm going to zoom in to just the plaque, and you can see it's lost quite a bit of sharpness to it. And if you tap on the brush, I'm going to expose the image that does not have all this texture of the bump mapping to it. And I'm going to bring up the opacity a bit and just paint that in. You see how much sharper it gets. Now again, because I have the opacity up quite a bit, it gives this plaque some maybe texture or lack of texture. So if you want to, you could remove the texture from the whole plaque if you felt that that gave it a better look than to have some of the texture, or you can lower the opacity, bring the brush in, bring a bigger brush, and just kind of paint the texture in certain parts. Again, this is your art, so you can pretty much play with it any way you want to. But one thing I personally want to be sure that happens is that these letters are nice and sharp as I can get them from the image that I took. So now again, before you move forward, be sure you tap the check mark on the bottom of the toolbar to apply or process the image. So again, that was for just the area of the plaque. Now I also wanted to do the same thing, which I should have, instead of applying it, I should just move forward, but I'm going to go back to Add Exposure in my For Nina folder, bring in the same image. Again, this was just because I was moving too fast. Hit Fit to Image. It'll automatically line them up for me, and now I can focus on everything but the wallpaper. And again, I chose that I want the wallpaper to have the texture in it with nothing else. So I can move the diameter and the opacity up of the brush But you know, one thing I want to avoid is this border. I don't want to touch the border. So as I move around, I want to be sure that I'm paying attention to some details here and not hit the border. And I'm going to move through this fairly fast so we don't take too much time doing it. But as I demonstrated in part 2, and I'll do a little bit of demonstrating here too, is it is important to move the image around, change from the brush to the eraser, and when I tap on the eraser I'm going to actually move the diameter of the brush much smaller and paint this frame back in and keep the texture on the frame because I like that texture to stay on the frame. And then move down, take the brush, make it a little larger, paint in some of these other areas, and again you can see that it's taking off that bump mapping off of it because the image behind here is the image prior to the bump mapping. So that's the reason that the bump mapping is disappearing. It's doing it in a masking fashion. The mask behind here does not have the bump mapping on it. Now again, which ones do I pick? It's totally a personal choice. I'm going to actually increase this brush size to move a little faster, and you can see that the color starts changing and so forth because this is actually the layer prior to the dynamic light. Now if you didn't want to do that, you'd have to make sure that you didn't apply the bump mapping prior to the dynamic light and then applied the dynamic light again, because right now if I was to apply the dynamic light right now, I would not be able to just apply it to this one area unless I spent some time doing that. So again, I'm just going to zoom in so you can see that the texture still in the wallpaper or the wall that now has a kind of a wallpaper effect to it, but I took it out of some of these other areas in the foreground. So we now have a little bit more depth coming back to our image. And so I'm going to again tap the check mark to apply that. And I didn't have to do this in 2 steps as I described earlier. But the last thing I want to do is to add a little bit more depth again. I'm going to try to bring in the highlights a little bit more, and I like to use the curve layer for that. And when using the curves, if you pull the curve down it gets darker, and if you pull the curve up it gets lighter. Now that's a very simplistic explanation to this, but for this purpose I am showing my workflow more than I'm describing the app itself. So as you see, this is the original here, and I'm going to pop up the brightness in some of the white area. And so to apply that, I'm going to apply it only to the white area, so I want to be sure to tap on the brush with the word mask next to it. And now that layer of the bright part will be behind it, and I'm going to pull it, bring it forward, or expose it by brushing it into the areas that I want it to go in. So again, when you tap on the brush you have all these wonderful choices. I'm going to bring the opacity down a little bit, keep the diameter of the brush reasonable, and just paint in these areas that I want to bring in a little lighter. Now this is a very subtle look. You probably won't notice it that much in between the 2 images, but again it's just a personal choice that I like to do because I know that our eyes see things where the brighter parts do pull forward, the darker parts go back. And I'm going to avoid, again, tapping on, or excuse me, brushing on that frame, because I don't want the frame to be part of being pulled forward. I only want the cup part of the white. And then I'm going to also move over to the rims of these half and halves. So again, I'm not brushing in as delicately or as carefully as I would if, actually I kind of like this red being brought up a little brighter too. I go back and forth between my brush and the eraser quite a bit when I'm spending a lot of time on this. And don't be afraid, like you see me going back and forth, zooming in and zooming out, coming back, looking at your image, seeing if you like it. I think now that I've seen what I have done to some of the other areas, I'm going to actually bring in this Smucker's white label a little bit. As you see, there's not a lot of change. Now, unfortunately, with Filterstorm, there is not a before and after, which I wish there was. It would be very handy right now to be able to tap before and after so you could actually see the changes. But now you can see there's so much more dimension in this from before. So I'm going to tap on the check mark, and in order to save this, you need to make sure that you tap in the upper left-hand corner, the box with the arrow, select your photo library, hit export, and I make sure that I double check that I am getting the largest image size and so forth before I export it. Depending on how much work you've done to the image, it takes a while to process them, and since I did 3 different masks, it will take a bit to process. So I'm not actually going to wait to process this through. Well, maybe I can. Seems to be moving pretty good. Like I said, sometimes it does take a little bit longer. Now I'm doing the curve layer. It at least tells you as you're going along. After I did the curve layer, I did some brushing to it, and then it'll reload that image afterwards, after it's completely saves it. So if you do want to move again forward from this point, you can. Save to the library. Now it's loading again. So it's going to be in my library, and I then can move forward again, knowing that it's the last image in my library. But in this case, I'm going to show you that this is where I left off, is right here. And the last thing that I'm going to do is actually bring in my signature. You can always tell when I'm done. It's down at the bottom. I put in my name with the app impressions most of the time. So for this demonstration, we started here with the dynamic light version. The plaque was less focused, so we brought in the one prior to the bump mapping, so it got to be a little sharper, and also, which you can see here, and then also took then the rest of the texture off of the foreground and all of the white and brightened the white a bit. And then I put, the last thing I did was I used impressions to put my name and the date on the bottom. So this is the end of part 4. I hope you've enjoyed the process here, that when I showed a little bit of my workflow. I do bounce from apps to apps. I do usually include quite a few. My ones that I seem to use the most, no matter what starting and ending point I get to, seem to be Image Blender, Snapseed, and Filterstorm. They are definitely my go-to apps I use a lot. So my recommendation is to become familiar with those. Filterstorm is, of the 3, is the most intense. There's a lot to it. I've demonstrated a very small portion of it, but one that I use a lot. And I recommend that you learn and enjoy playing around, move the sliders, and see what is possible. So again, this is part 4, the last part of Reserved for Nina. I look forward to your comments, and if you have any questions, please ask. Thanks and have a great day.